In this video, I will demonstrate how to set up an Ubuntu 20.04 LTS LAMP development server for ProcessWire and use PHP version 8 as well as MySQL version 8. We'll use the apt package manager to install most of the primary software. We're going to use Digitalocean for our virtual server. However, these instructions would be mostly the same for Linode or WSL2 in Windows since you're given basically the same starting point. It takes less than 10 minutes to complete. You could also use these same instructions for a production server, although you might want to enable a few extra security settings. First, let's set up a droplet in DigitalOcean. We'll go to Create Droplet, and I'll choose Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. Now, while we could use a newer version of Ubuntu, we want to stick with the LTS version for security purposes and also because some of the packages that we want to install, like PHP version 8, are more straightforward to get on the LTS version. So we'll stick with that. And for the purposes of this screencast, I'll just choose a $6 a month server. It's good enough for demonstrating. And I'll use San Francisco Data Center. And we'll scroll down. I will choose IPv6. And we're going to use my SSH key to log in, which is much more convenient. And we'll name this something like LAMP. Feel free to choose a name that works for you. And we'll go ahead and create our droplet. So our droplet is now complete, and you can see our IP address here. I'll go ahead and copy that. Let's expand it further. And you can see our IPv6 IP address here as well. So over here, I have a domain name called johnlahi.com. That's just a domain name I have for testing purposes. And what I want to do is set the A record for this to the IP address of our droplet. So I will set the A record to that IP address. And then we can also do the IPv6 address. So if I come here and I copy the IPv6 address, and then I add another record, I can use the AAA, which is IPv6, and save that as well. So that's ready to go. So now that the server is up, let's connect to it through the IP address. And let's say yes. And now we're in our server. So the first thing we want to do is run apt update. Next, we want to run sudo apt upgrade. Then we want to install zip and unzip because ProcessWire does make use of that. So let's do sudo apt install zip and then also unzip. Okay, so let's start building out the LAMP stack. We'll start with MySQL. So we'll do sudo apt install MySQL server. Next, let's install Apache. So we'll do sudo apt install Apache 2. Now there's a few modules that ProcessWire uses that we need to install for Apache. And of course, we need the rewrite module so that URL rewrites work. But we also want to install the headers module and the expires module because the procache module for ProcessWire takes advantage of that. So let's install those. Sudo a2enmod, which is used to install modules for Apache 2. Rewrite. That'll install the rewrite module. Then we want the headers module, so headers, and then the expires module. So those are now enabled. So let's restart Apache. There we go. The next thing we want to do is install PHP. While we could install PHP using apt as well, Ubuntu 20.04 will unfortunately give us the PHP 7.3 or 7.4 version. So this article here goes through the exact steps of how to do that. So let's first run this command here, which will install software properties common. Then we want to add a repository which has the PHP version. Let's hit enter. Now let's run sudo apt update. Now let's install PHP with this command here, and we're using PHP FPM. Now we need to enable PHP in Apache with this command. Then we need to run this command here. And finally restart Apache. And then we want to install a few PHP extensions. So we'll install PHP 8's zip, mbstring, curl, gd, xml, MySQL, the international library, and Composer itself with apt. And those are all extensions that ProcessWire uses as well. And you might use Composer for package management within PHP. So let's install those. So let's run a tool that will secure our MySQL installation. It's called MySQL Secure Installation using this command. And first thing we want to do is decide whether to use the validate password component. Since this is a development server, I'm going to say no. And let's set our password. For development servers, you can just set something simple. I will use password for password. Next, should we remove anonymous users? Yes. Next, it asks, should we disallow root login remotely? And I'm going to say yes, we should disallow that because we don't want people to try to hack into our MySQL database remotely. So we only want local connections. So I'm going to say yes. And then let's choose yes for removing the test databases. And reload the privileges tables, yes. And we're all done. Now, even though we ran MySQL secure installation, which asked us to set a password, the fact of the matter is it actually doesn't set the password as far as I can tell. This is a bug, or maybe it's not a bug, I'm not really sure, but we have to do one more command to set the root password so that it actually works with ProcessWire or logging in through something like Adminer, which we could use to manage our database. So we want to run the following command. This command will choose the root user and set a password to what we have here, which will be password. This is probably not the most secure way to do it, but as far as I can tell, it's the most straightforward. So we'll run that command, and now the root MySQL user account actually has the password of password. Now you can see our website is actually loading if I go to the domain name and we get the Apache 2 default page. And this file is in the default Ubuntu-based Apache directory, which is /var/www/html. Let's go ahead and edit that file. We can see the file here. Let's exit. Let's remove that file. And let's create a new file. And we'll just do a .php file for this purpose. And if we refresh, you will see our PHP-based index file. Before we move on further, let's actually create a general user account since we don't want to be the root user all the time. This is a security best practice. So to add a user account, if you're using WSL2, you will already have a user account created because during the installation process of WSL2, Ubuntu will force you to create a user account. So you don't need to do this if you already have a user account. To create a user account, we will run this command here, and this will add the user jlogjohnny, as well as create a home directory and give it sudo access. So let's run that command. And now let's set the password. And we'll set the password to something secure. All right, let's check that the home directory exists. And there we are. Now that the user is set up, we want to log in as that user. This video won't demonstrate how to set up SSH keys for users, but feel free to look that up. So let's go ahead and switch to that user with the following command. Now let's create a folder where we'll store our sites. Afterwards, we'll configure virtual hosts. We'll create a folder called sites. Then we'll download the latest development version of ProcessWire using Git. We'll use this command to download the latest version of ProcessWire into a folder called johnlahi.com. Now that ProcessWire is downloaded, we need to set the permissions of the sites folder and everything inside of it so that the web server Apache can write changes to the files. And this is especially important during the installer phase. So there are various permissions that can be set based on ProcessWire's documentation, but for development server, I think just setting everything to 777 should be fine. Obviously, when you go live to production, you want to be a little bit more careful. So we'll go ahead and just set everything to 777. And that takes care of that. Now let's set up the virtual hosts. The virtual host files are in /etc/apache2. Inside the Apache2 folder, we'll see the sites available folder. So let's go into that. And as you can see, we have the 000-default.conf, which points to the original location, which was var www.html. So let's actually look at that real quick. And you can see here, it's pointing to that directory we saw earlier. So what we want to do is create a new virtual host pointing to the sites directory /johnlahi.com folder that we just created. And let's create a file named johnlahi.com.conf. And we can see the file there. Now let's edit that file and give it the correct settings. So we'll do sudo nano johnlahi.com.conf. Make sure you use sudo. And first thing we want to do is enable the server name, and we'll want to set that to the domain name. Next, we need to point the document root to where our files exist. And notice there's no ending slash here, so let's do that. One last thing we have to do is to allow htaccess files to take effect in this site, as well as allow the site to actually work properly, given that it's inside the home directory as opposed to the var www directory. And to do that, we will use the following bit of code. So this allows htaccess files to be respected, and then this allows the site to run inside of a home user directory. If you don't put this, you will get forbidden errors, and if you don't put this, you will have issues with rewriting. So, and then this one here allows symlinks to actually work, which is very useful. So those are the options that I like to have. Let's save our changes and exit. Now we need to enable that virtual host. So let's run the following command: sudo a2en site, which stands for Apache2 enable site, and then the name of the configuration file. So johnlahi.com.conf. Now that it's enabled, we have to actually restart Apache. So sudo systemctl reload apache2. Let's also just restart Apache for good measure. We're just about ready to install ProcessWire, but before we do, let's create a database. We could use MySQL in the command line to do it, but I'll demonstrate how to do it with adminer. Let's first go back to our site directory. Then let's download adminer. This is the adminer webpage, and we have a few download options. It's a single file, and we can get it for just MySQL, and we can get it in just the English language. So I will choose this one here. Let me copy the link address, and then I will use wget to download the file. So the file has been downloaded, and I'm just going to rename that to something a little bit easier. So I'll do the move command, and I'll just call it adminer.php. So I'm on the adminer.php file. Let's log in, and let's go ahead and create a database. And now we can go ahead and install ProcessWire. So let's go to the main website directory, and let's get started. And we'll choose the blank site profile. And as you can see, there are no errors here. Everything is good to go, given all the settings that we set up earlier. So let's continue. We'll type in our database name, our database credentials. Let's use InnoDB. And I will use just the naked domain, and we'll enable debug mode. So our installation has proceeded successfully. So let's go ahead and set up our admin section and our username. And we'll do all the cleanup. And we are good to go. So let's go to the admin. As you can see, we're in the admin section, which means that URL rewriting is working. Let's log in. And we have ProcessWire installed. Let's talk about enhancing our setup a little bit further by adding SSL. Now, since I'm using DigitalOcean, there are no issues with blocked ports because it's an actual virtual server and it is not on a private internet connection, which if you're using something like WSL2, it might be on a private internet connection. So we can add SSL to our site using Let's Encrypt certbot. But if your ISP, and if you're using WSL2, if your ISP blocks port 80, you won't be able to do this. You will have to use a self-signed certificate. Now, it used to be with my internet provider, I have Spectrum, which is Time Warner, that they blocked port 80. But sometime in the past, maybe in the last 2 years, they actually stopped blocking port 80 and port 587 as well, which means we can actually use Let's Encrypt certbot to install an actual SSL certificate, which is the ideal situation. And this assumes that you know how to open WSL2 up to the outer internet and so on and so forth, which this video won't get into. But assuming that you don't have any blocked ports, or if you're using DigitalOcean, which in that case you don't, then we can just install a Let's Encrypt certificate. So if you go to the certbot website, we're going to use Apache, and we're going to use Ubuntu 20.04. And it's going to tell you exactly what to do, and it's going to say to install the first SSH into the server, and then install snapd, which Ubuntu 20.04 does have. And then it says to run this command here. We'll run that command. Now let's install certbot. Now let's prepare the certbot command with this command here. And then let's run this command to get certbot on Apache. I will go ahead and enter my email address. Okay, so it detected the virtual hosts. And as you can see, we have our virtual host that we created earlier. So let's just hit enter for all of them. It's going to go ahead and get a certificate and do all the configuration automatically. And there we go. And now our site is SSL enabled. So if we go back to our browser and we go back to our ProcessWire website and we refresh, you're going to see that we are now on SSL. So let's log back in. And certbot automatically has updated the Apache virtual host file with the correct rewrites and so on for making the SSL run. So you don't actually have to touch the default htaccess file that ProcessWire provides, although it might be worth looking into if there are any other tweaks that you need, but that alone will pretty much handle it for you. And that's all there is to it.